but those of you that have been following what we do, and I hope that's all of you, we have been focusing an awful lot on analytics. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why we're doing that, if it's not blatantly obvious, from the fantastic work that Laura and her team are doing on the basis of that, and other things that you'll hear. Just to kind of talk through, I think, some of the details as to why this is such an important change for us, and also, I think, a change for content teams. So analytics is everywhere. I don't know if you're not staying at the hotel, you might not recognize this. The back by the pool is one of these machines that does advanced purification. If you put your water under get your water bottle filled, why not? It tells you, and there's a little dashboard. Have I got a pointer? I can't point at it anyway. Underneath the little blue panel on the right of the machine has a little blue rectangle in it that you can see. That is a little display. And that display is not really doing anything other than trying to motivate you to use this machine, right? And so what it's doing is giving you analytics. It tells you, when you go up and press the button, it tells you how many thousands of bottles are now not in landfill due to you having used this machine. So it is using analytics just like your Fitbit, your Apple Watch, or whatever it is you have on your wrists. I have an ordinary one. It's using the analytics to try and drive behavior and to drive, the purpose of its own existence, which is to give you more 7 times filtered water. So this is a trend everywhere in every activity of what we do, and I think what we've done is to try to take this up and apply it to what we do. So I want to just talk you through how I think we've done that. Yeah, an easy question, and I think we've already been through some of the answers. But when we try to encourage people, when we start to engage with them about content, to think about why they're here. And quite often they come with the answer of, I write content, I write user guides, or I write product marketing content, or whatever. And then we ask why again, and they say, well, why do you do that? Well, because we need to communicate what's in the product. And then we say why again. You go, well, because it's a complex product and it needs explanation. And why? And at some point, eventually, you will get to the actual benefit, which is probably quite often 5 or 6 times down the line before you actually get to the benefit. And it just shows, I think, how hard it is sometimes when you're a practitioner under pressure with too few resources to keep your eye on why it is we're doing things. And I talked this morning about, keep asking the why. I think it's incredibly important that we have that there. Also, as you heard from Laura, as a way of orienting the whole team around why we're doing what we're doing and why we even exist as a team of writers. We all know that it does happen occasionally, that entire writing teams, entire content teams get dissolved or moved, or some other function happens, or they get shifted to another continent because there are other people apparently who can do it just as cheap. Just as well for far less money, is what I meant to say. None of these things are true, but without having a way of making that argument, we are vulnerable. We're unable to justify why it is we do what we do. So I think we have been characterizing the things that we do, as Chris just said, along these lines of typically the way we support people is to making more sales, driving sales further, is often one of the major drivers for creating content. I think Laura, when she introduces herself as saying why she does what she does, one of the first things she says is, I drive sales, right? Which for a technical product content person is unusual, but it's actually perfectly something she can back up with data, right? So that's the position we need to get in order to be able to justify what we're doing. The second big thing that comes up is keeping customers. As I said this morning, retention of customers is increasingly a significant driver. Most companies that are on recurring revenue as a model for what they do are making more recurring revenue than they are new sales every year. So the recurring revenue is the biggest chunk of revenue they need to worry about. That means if you are driving customer satisfaction, if you are driving onboarding of trial customers and converting them to paying customers, you are driving revenue. You are securing revenue. You are contributing towards the most important business impact that you can have. And the third thing that Chris talked about, this idea of risk, it could be in some instances legal risk, compliance risk, risk of being fined by some regulatory body, risk of liability, health and safety. It could be a brand risk that's associated with these things. All of these things are real, hesitate to say the word value, but it's a form of value that you bring by doing it well or less well and content carries a lot of that burden. And of course, there's a continuum there between the real horror stories that you hear, but there are every step of the way, every problem that you have with brand consistency, any small problem with lack of clarity, increasingly, a lack of clarity is being seen as a potentially a potential violation of consumer rights in terms and conditions on public-facing, on B2C content. So there are whole areas where increasingly that risk is emerging, and we have then an opportunity as content creators to align ourselves with managing that risk being part of the value of what we do. Does that make sense? So I think when we're thinking about how do we make the case for what we do, and how do we measure whether what we do has any benefit for the organization, we can use these three things as a way of indicating whether we're moving the needle. I don't know. I didn't realize. I don't know whether you've ever thought what moving the needle means. I always assumed it meant moving, like on a speedometer, moving the needle. But then when I was looking for an image, I found this seismograph, and I thought, actually, that's what I'll always have in my head from now on, is moving the needle. You're trying to when you create a little earthquake, you move the needle, right? Does that make any sense? You're looking at me like I'm... Okay, content earthquakes are always good, right? Okay, I'm going to ignore the right side of the room. Is the left side of the room with me or not? Yeah, there's people nodding over here. So, okay, whatever. So we're trying to move the needle. We're trying to create impact and effect according to one of these dimensions. And that's really what we want to do. If we're sitting there all day creating content and we don't know why, at some point that's going to end badly, right? For us or for the company or for both. So that's where we need to get to. And the driver behind all of this is then the fuel, the tools you can use to do all this is going to be the analytics around the content that we've talked about already today. So that's kind of the inspiration for this. Of course, analytics are very misleading, can be very misleading. This is a wonderful website called Spurious Correlations, I think it's called. You can look it up. If you look up Spurious Correlations, you'll land on the website. They have a whole bunch of these things, which they're all relatively small data sets. But what they manage to do is find completely random correlations between things that happen over the years in a way that looks like they are influencing each other. So we were all fine as long as Miss America stayed over 22. As soon as her age dropped, sorry, we weren't fine. We were just plodding along. As soon as her age dropped, there was a radical fall, dramatic fall in the number of murders by steam or hot gases in North America. So we could have been managing that low, and then everything was all good for a couple of years, and then Miss America gets old again, and all of a sudden, the murder by steam and hot vapors and hot objects goes through the roof. Obviously, right? Because Miss America's now a bit older. Well, I picked this one because it actually goes up and down. There's some of them that are really spooky. But the point I want to make is that it's very easy to find correlations and to pick the ones that you think are make your case for you. We have to be a little bit rigorous about picking the ones that really are going to show impact. Nevertheless, the numbers can do magical things for you. A lot of people are being asked to do this, basically, by their management. Right? So they're being asked to say, can you just create some content that does this with my users, my audience, whoever they are? That's what I want. And then the executives leave the room, and you're left thinking, okay, what am I supposed to do now? How do I do that? And of course, it's a completely unrealistic expectation to do anything like that at scale. The content marketing industry, when they started, there's a lot of good things about what they were driving. One of the most irritating things about the content marketing movement has been this focus on viral content. Just write a. Why don't they used to fill the conferences, and they're still full to some extent, with people telling a story about how they created a viral YouTube video for their content, and what's sometimes called home run content. You know, one piece of content that's going to hit it out of the park, and from then on we'll be famous and everything will be great. And of course, content experiences aren't like that. They are hard work. And one piece of content will get you a lot of awareness. And I've talked before about the Volvo case where they had Jean-Claude Van Damme with his doing the splits across the trucks. The great thing about that story was that that program was that they built a viral campaign. They got the viral effect that they had. They then had a follow-up. They had a plan as to how to follow that through by narrowing their audience towards their actual buyers and then giving those buyers detailed product content that would that would lead them to buying. So it can be done well. But this kind of effect is generally not terribly helpful. It gives you a huge boost in audience. Most of that audience will be irrelevant to the people you actually want to speak to. And without the follow-up that will take the journey further, it'll be a waste of effort. Actually, when I ask people, who is the truck manufacturer for whom Jean-Claude Van Damme did the splits? I think no one can tell me. No one in the general public can tell me. If you ask a truck buyer, they all know it's Volvo. So you'll know it's Volvo next time. But typically, it's interesting how little of that, beyond the viral gag, will stay in people's heads. So I think where we need to get to is to say we need to arm ourselves with this so that when people say to you we need to create great content, we can raise our hands and say, can you tell me what you mean? Can you tell me what great content means to you? What would great look like? Chris talked about this. You know, what would it mean for us to have the great content? How would we know when we'd been successful? You might get those faces that you had before. That might be your goal. I doubt it, but that might be. That's at least the start of the conversation as to why are we doing this. Now, of course, with analytics, there are two ways in which this can go, and Chris has talked about it already. This idea that analytics, being measured, being governed is a scary thing. It's not something typically people get up in the morning and want. You know, I'm really happy I can go to work and be measured today. This is going to be great for me. And so there's this idea somehow that we're entering into this dark kind of dystopia where everybody's, you know, they come to work and every key press is measured and everything that they do is measured and how many words they create is measured, and then all of that is put into a big data cloud and then all churns out, and I'm just a cog in a machine. It's often something people are more concerned about. I'm a very optimistic person, and I'd like to see this in a different way, and in a very similar way to what Laura described just before lunch, which is this can be a tool for us to have discussions about what we do. And instead of viewing this as something that comes from outside, which it will, if we don't own it, it will come from outside, instead of regarding it as an external control on us, take ownership of it. And then, as you heard from Laura, you'll be able to use it as a tool for you to have discussions. And so you can imagine being able to go into meetings and say, okay, this is what we want to do, and here's the data that says what we've done already and how far we've gone, and we want to continue to do more of this stuff because look how successful it is. And that is a liberating experience. It gives you the ability to be able to take control of the agenda of why do we create content. You can pick your own metrics, right, at that point, because your management doesn't know what the right metrics are, right? So that's an opportunity for you, for us together, to sit down and say, okay, let's pick our metrics and decide how we want to measure the impact we're having and take ownership of it. And then say, okay, look how we have been able to drive impact over the last 12 months, over the last quarter, in the last 7 days, whatever. And so we see this as our mission to help give you the tools that you need to be able to get control of the process, do all the good things that we've heard about getting your arms around the content. But at the same time, this is not just for you. This is for you to be able to talk to the rest of the organization about what you do. So that's kind of where we want to get to with the whole analytics piece, and I think why we have spent so much of the time that you've most gratefully given us, listened to what we have to say. We've taken so much of that time to talk about analytics because it is a game changer for the way that we think about what we do. So how do we make this happen? How do we actually do this in practice? Big words of choosing your analytics and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to give you a couple of examples. This is the kind of thing we can now, a conversation we can have, and this could be a new customer for us, or it could be a new department within an existing customer. It could be a review of a team that already exists. This can be used in a whole bunch of different ways, but this is basically product. This is basically what comes straight out of Acrolinx as product. What you can see here is we can already say you are now, you owner of this bit of content, this repository that we're looking at is currently at 74. We think, based on the type of content and the experience we've had, we think you should be at 85 for this particular type of content. So already right there in this one slide, you have the ability to say to management, say to the customer, say to your team members in another team, whatever, that's what we need to fix, right? We need to get up 11 points, right? It's not meaningful in itself, other than it sets you a benchmark that allows you to then move from, and gives you a goal that you can share. More important than that, this is, if you like, an Acrolinx internal thing. More important than that, to discuss the value, is to understand why would that be a problem. So what happens when this content fails in the job that it's been created for? What happens when the content doesn't work? And that's the conversation about driving, keeping customers, winning customers, managing risk. Whatever those things are that you want to pick out as the reason why this would be a problem. Why do we care about this, right? Because if the answer is, okay, I'm 11 points down on what I should be, but it doesn't really matter, then there's no point in having that conversation any further, right? It could be a legacy product that's been sunsetted, and who cares whether the content is not where it needs to be? Okay, we'd rather fix it if we had nothing else to do, but we're all busy, so let's not. But if you can establish a business impact for this with one of those questions from before, then we have a value discussion that we can all get behind, that we can all get motivated by. Last year, Gracie Flores from Nestle was here and delivered a presentation where she talked about how she had been through this process and showed how they had moved from, they had established that poor clarity was impacting on their ability for their training content to do the job that it was supposed to do, which was training their internal staff into how to use extremely expensive, extremely mission-critical manufacturing machinery right across the planet. If one of these machines gets broken or wrongly maintained and goes out of service, this is costing the company millions, right? No chocolate bars for that country for the foreseeable future. So there's a huge value that she had worked through by asking why. Why does training matter? Why, what is the impact of doing this? She had been through that process of asking all those whys to get to the real business value, and had worked back from that to the point of, okay, we need to fix the clarity. Clarity is what's going to move the needle, right? And then, a year later, she's able to report, okay, look at the green bit. You don't have to think of any of this. You're a manager. You're very busy. I go into the presentation and I say, okay, just look at that green thing, right? We had 103 greens. We now have 533 green things. Isn't that good? Job done, right? Let's do more of this, right? Very simple. You set yourself one goal, and then you can track to that goal. Nearly fell off there. You can track to that goal and move the needle forward, okay? This is a very simple example, but it's something that works in terms of, getting the team aligned about why this is an important thing to do, giving them a simple goal to aim for, where they know what good enough means in this particular instance. As Chris says, what good means depends on what you're trying to get done. Defining a simple definition of what good means, and then track how you're moving towards it. Okay? And I'm going to go very quickly through a couple of other examples that some of you may have seen before, but similar ones from other cases. So this was from RS Components, who showed a correlation between content scoring. Lots of blue means lots of issues, which means poor quality content. Fewer blue dots means better content. And as you go to the left, you're seeing the conversion rate. Conversion rate in this sense means sales, right? So they were able to show to their management that better content, products with better content around them were selling better. So then they were able to say to management, you know what, I think we should improve some of the content, because by improving some of the content, we know that some of the products that aren't selling, not all of them, but the ones that are not selling because of the content will sell better, right? The poor products will not sell anyway, but the ones with good content, with bad content, the good products with bad content will sell better. We also heard from Tyson last year. You can look this up. I've changed the colors a little bit. I hope you don't mind, but just to fit in on my graphic. This is from Tyson's presentation last year, where his team were able to show, after going backwards and forwards on a whole bunch of different dimensions, we're able to show a correlation between largely clarity, right? Okay. Right. Okay. Right. So an update's coming from Tyson soon. Another case from last year at the presentation at the conference here was from OutSystems, who were struggling with this conversion problem where they were losing lots of people in a sign-up process, and they were able to show they were losing up to 50% of the people as they were walking through the sign-up process. And these videos are all online. They were able to, just by changing the language that they used to get through the process, were able to show a dramatic increase in the conversion rates for their content. So all of these things are different cases, different business cases that we're seeing, that we're hearing, but all based around the same method, the same principle of picking your business value and aligning your content metrics, your content analytics with those, with that business value, and using that then as a driver for change and as a way of communicating to the business what that change is. So all of this means then that we have changed the way we think about what we do. Previously, we've talked about a number of the 3 different components of what we do in a number of different ways. Last year, I think we talked about the 3 Gs: goals, guidance, and governance that Laura mentioned. We are starting to think that, in fact, there's a different way of thinking about this, and in fact, the most effective way of getting this done is to start with the analytics. The out-of-the-box analytics that we have will now give you an indication of where you need to do things, of where you are against kind of industry guidelines, industry benchmarks and standards. And I think what we're seeing is that the data that you get from that can drive a very focused process on where do we need to work next. As Laura was talking about, the ability to look at a whole bunch of content and decide not only how much of a problem I have, but where do I need to start. So what we're encouraging people to do is to think about maybe starting with analytics as the first thing that you do. Measure your content against generic guidelines before you start to move into a great deal of further customization or configuration or setup around the brand goals that you have, because even those generic analytics can guide the process of you deciding what your brand goals are, especially if you're looking at different teams and different types of content. You're looking at, instead of deciding by thinking it up what terminology you have, maybe look at what terminology you're actually using and how that's partitioned or distributed across the content that you have, the messaging that you have, the different tones of voice that you might want to have for different content types. All of those decisions can actually be data-driven. They can be based on a first pass of the analytics engine to give you the ability to decide based on how your content is. If you want to transition, if you want to move to a new place, a lot of the people we work with are trying to change their tone of voice to something more modern, more conversational, more friendly or chatty. In those kind of environments, people are typically trying to understand where they want to be. They don't really know what the end goal looks like, and so it's a journey that you want to be on. And therefore, setting benchmarks from the start and looking at whether you're improving, rather than just setting a stake in the ground at a random point in the future, is a much more helpful way of working through that transformation. Okay, so 3 takeaways. I hope I've made the case that successful content initiatives should be data-driven, and that the content governance, the passive content governance you have, the written down guidelines and the terminology lists and the SEO keywords, and all of those things that you have are fine, but typically all of them need to be validated against the facts. And the facts are the content that you've created, the audiences you have, all of the other things that are going on, the life of your content. And the data there can be your best friend. Secondly, the Acrolinx score is not a thing in itself. It's just a score. It's just a tool that will help you align around something. It's not in itself a kind of golden number that says something about your content. It needs a context, is what I'm saying. And typically, in the best case, the context will come from a business value that you've associated with that content. So what we're trying to do is to keep asking why until we have a business value. Once we have a business value, we work back from that to understand, how can I measure the content? How can I ask Acrolinx, set Acrolinx up to measure the content in such a way that I can predict that business value, that business impact that I need? Thank you.